On the battlefield, a girl was about to be executed by a group of German soldiers. Just then, a whistle sounded in the distance. A young man appeared, shirtless, waving his pants in the air. He ran toward them, immediately drawing the soldiers' attention. The Germans went on full alert, dispatching a soldier to check out the situation while everyone else pointed their guns at the young man. But the young man didn't seem fazed at all. He put on his pants and ran forward. When the officer demanded to know where he came from, the young man said nothing, gasping for air as if he couldn't speak. The colonel, growing impatient with his silence, punched him square in the face, shouting, "Where on earth did you come from, you brat? How dare you refuse to answer?" The young man appeared to be choking on something, but then, to everyone's surprise, he slowly pulled a piece of fabric from his mouth, one adorned with a German military medal. The officer, recognizing the medal, assumed the young man was one of their own, and lowered his gun. Little did he know that the young man had just stripped the medal from a German prisoner. Out of nowhere, some music started playing. The young man reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a pocket watch, one that actually belonged to the colonel. The colonel was baffled. When did he take that? He instinctively reached out to grab the watch, but before he could, the young man leaped into a dry well. The officer stepped forward to check the situation. The young man calmly extended a hand, signaling for someone to pull him out. The colonel was about to punch him when he suddenly realized the pocket watch was already back in his possession. Startled, he burst into hearty laughter, his anger dissipating as curiosity about the young man grew. "Looks like this young man's got some tricks up his sleeve." The young man then continued his antics, launching into an elaborate mime performance. He pretended to lift an invisible barbell, straining and grimacing as though it weighed a ton. His exaggerated expressions and comedic timing sent the German soldiers into fits of laughter. Even the officer couldn't help but crack a smile, visibly relaxing. During this round of jokes, the young man focused his performance on the officer, making it easy to get him into the fun. The officer took a calm bite of an apple, watching the young man with quiet curiosity. The young man, unfazed, mimicked him, pretending to eat an apple too, except his apple was actually a grenade. The soldiers immediately went on high alert, guns raised, but the officer gestured for them to hold their fire. Intrigued by what the man was planning, the young man started juggling the grenade like a circus performer, skillfully distracting everyone as he slowly backed toward a nearby house. The soldiers kept their guns trained on him, but the officer remained completely unbothered. His interest peaked. Moments later, the young man burst out of the house, now wearing a wooden barrel over his head. Unable to see, he staggered and stumbled, his clumsy movements so ridiculous that the German soldiers burst into laughter. His chaotic sprint was a spectacle, and the soldiers couldn't stop watching as he veered wildly in all directions. Eventually, the young man charged straight into the midst of the German soldiers, causing a commotion as they jostled and shoved to get away from him. This seemed like the perfect chance to take out the distracted soldiers in one fell swoop. But when the officer went to investigate the scene, he found the wooden barrel empty. The young man had vanished. "How is that possible?" the officer muttered, stunned. Did he just disappear into thin air? Or was it some kind of magic trick? Let's take a moment to revisit what happened with the girls earlier to understand the bigger picture. On the battlefield, two young girls had been captured by the German army. The officer demanded they reveal the hidden location of the Russian forces, warning them that their lives were at stake if they refused. One of the girls pleaded for mercy, insisting she didn't know anything, but the officer was unmoved. Instead, he stepped between the two girls, cruelly ordering them to smile for the camera. This scene was being watched from a distance by the Russian forces. They realized the girls' lives were in immediate danger. The Russian forces quickly came up with a plan to step in. The officer then ordered a soldier nicknamed Fatso to personally execute the two girls. But as Fatso looked at their innocent faces, he hesitated. He couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. Furious, the officer slapped him hard across the face and turned to the others, demanding they carry out the execution. None of the soldiers wanted to be the executioner, their hesitation clear. Enraged, the officer barked at them. "Showing mercy to others is cruelty to yourself. On the battlefield, you must learn to be ruthless." As he spoke, he pulled out his pistol and aimed it at a random soldier, who closed his eyes, bracing himself for death. But just then, the acrobatic young man burst onto the scene. So how did he just disappear out of the barrel? The colonel went to check the car but found no one inside. The soldiers began to grow wary, sensing that something was off. Suddenly, the sound of a cat meowing came from above. The Germans looked up, only to see the young man perched on the rooftop. No one could figure out how or when he'd gotten up there. Imitating a cat, the young man began licking his own leg in an exaggeratedly elegant manner. The absurdity of the scene sent the soldiers into fits of laughter, with some even pretending to be cat caretakers, playfully coaxing him to come down. Even the officer, usually stern and unyielding, found himself clapping along to the man's antics. But the young man wasn't done yet. His next act involved a ladder. Instead of leaning the ladder against the roof as one would expect, he stood it upright, balancing it vertically on the ground. Then, to everyone's surprise, he climbed up and started doing aerial tricks like he was defying gravity. The soldiers below couldn't take their eyes off him, completely stunned as his stunts got harder and harder. Finally, he stood on the very top of the ladder with his arms stretched out, looking like he was floating in the air. The German soldiers were so captivated by the spectacle that they couldn't utter a single word, but the officer's expression darkened slightly. Something about this performance didn't sit right with him. While the soldiers were lost in awe, the officer's instincts told him there was more to this man's antics than mere entertainment. The young man deliberately performed acrobatics, drawing all attention to himself just as the two girls were about to be executed. He didn't say a single word, but his daring stunts captivated everyone, clearly an intentional attempt to divert attention. The officer, growing suspicious, stepped in front of the two girls, holding a medal in his hand. He demanded to know which unit the young man belonged to. When the young man remained silent, the officer, with a cold smile, kicked the wooden post beneath one of the girl's feet, making her lose her balance and wobble precariously. Meanwhile, Russian soldiers hidden in the bushes outside had their rifles trained on the officer, ready to intervene. But the officer, ever cunning, positioned himself directly behind the girls, using them as human shields. Locking eyes with the young man, the officer waited for his next move. The young man responded with a mocking, humiliating gesture, taunting the officer. Then, without warning, he threw himself off the roof, plummeting to the ground below. The shocking sight left everyone present stunned. The officer approached cautiously, nudging the seemingly lifeless young man with his boot. There was no reaction. He seemed dead. Satisfied, the officer turned his head to look back at the girls, but when he did, he realized something was wrong. The young man, who just moments ago had been lying lifeless, was gone. Where could he have disappeared to? The officer's instincts told him this wasn't over. It was truly astonishing. As the young man continued his acrobatics, the two girls who had been tied up had mysteriously vanished. All that remained were the empty ropes swaying gently in the breeze. The officer, realizing something was amiss, shouted, "Full alert!" But before he could finish his command, a gunshot rang out, and he fell dead to the ground. In an instant, bullets rained down from the surrounding bushes, cutting down the German soldiers one by one. Within moments, the entire German unit was annihilated, except for one lone soldier, who had hesitated earlier when ordered to harm the girls. The young man, who had seemingly died earlier, now rose to his feet, brushing himself off with a satisfied grin. He surveyed the scene of fallen bodies around him, his smile broadening. Even though the remaining soldier had spared the girls, he was still an enemy. Without hesitation, the young man raised his hand, mimicking a gun gesture, and in the next second, the soldier's head snapped back, executed with precision. With that, all the enemies were eliminated. While this Russian unit had achieved victory, another squad wasn't so lucky. They were captured by the enemy, and the Germans deliberately picked a scenic spot to film a video of them punishing the Russians. The German soldiers tossed shovels to the captured Russian troops and ordered them to start digging. At first, the Russian soldiers were exhausted and confused, not knowing what was coming. The German officer sat comfortably in his car, sipping tea, giving off an air of cruel indifference as the men worked. The Russian soldiers struggled to dig, discussing and guessing. What are they making us dig for? Graves? Trenches? They talked for a while, but no one could figure out the Germans' true intentions. After what felt like hours, the Germans finally ordered them to stop digging and climb out of the pit. But just as one soldier tried to step out, the officer coldly pressed his boot against the man's back, shoving him violently back into the hole. The other soldiers who tried to escape met the same fate, each being cruelly shoved back into the pit without mercy. The officer stood above them, gazing down with a sneer of utter disdain. In a calm, yet menacing tone, he declared, "You're Jewish spies disguised as Russian soldiers, attacking our camps. For that, you deserve to die." The Russian soldiers hurriedly tried to explain, "We're not Jews, we're Russian soldiers. This is a mistake." But their pleas fell on deaf ears. The German officer wasn't interested in the truth. He had fabricated the accusation purely as an excuse to justify their execution. Whether they were Jewish or not, he didn't care in the slightest. The Russian soldiers begged for mercy, pleading with the German officer, hoping for some kind of reprieve. To their shock, the officer allowed one of them to climb out of the pit. The soldier quickly scrambled to escape, only for a German soldier to coldly shoot him in the back as soon as he emerged. For the Germans, taking a life was as simple as crushing an ant underfoot. Casual, ruthless, and without a second thought, the officer then ordered the cameraman to begin filming. Eager to capture the moment and showcase his so-called bravery, the cameraman, without a word, understood the officer's intentions. He pointed out that the soldiers in the pit were messing up the shot. Using this as an excuse, the officer commanded 3 other soldiers standing outside the pit to bury the prisoners alive. The cruelty of the situation was unimaginable. The German officer was ordering them to bury their own comrades alive, an act of brutality that was too much to bear. Though these Russian soldiers were prisoners, they still had their honor and dignity. They could not, in good conscience, carry out such a monstrous task. One soldier, disgusted, threw his shovel down in protest. Seeing this, the officer snapped, slapping him across the face and growling, "You're a prisoner now, stop pretending to have any moral high ground." Unexpectedly, the other 2 soldiers also dropped their shovels. This action stirred the men in the pit, who wondered if the officer was finally showing some mercy and letting them out. But then the officer's next words crushed their remaining hope. "You want to die with your friends too?" The cruel realization set in. There would be no mercy, no salvation. The cruelty of the battlefield had reached unimaginable levels. The officer, filled with sadistic glee, ordered the 3 soldiers outside the pit to climb in. In a twisted reversal, it was now the turn of the soldiers who had narrowly escaped death to bury their comrades alive. The soldiers in the pit, aware of what was about to happen, spoke to their fellow soldiers above. "Do it. If our deaths can help you survive, we have no regrets. But remember, avenge us when it's over." Their bond, forged through countless hardships and battles, was unbreakable. Having survived the horrors of war together, their loyalty transcended even death. The 2 remaining soldiers above, now holding the shovels, made their decision. They threw down their tools in defiance, refusing to carry out the brutal task. The officer, furious at their disobedience, drew his pistol without hesitation. He aimed it squarely at one of the soldiers' heads, preparing to execute him on the spot. The soldier, however, was completely calm, his resolve unwavering. "Go ahead. If you want to shoot, do it." Holding the gun must be tiring. "So, hurry up." The officer, taken aback for a moment by the soldier's calm demeanor, quickly realized that killing him would be too easy. Instead, his mind raced, plotting a more torturous form of punishment. It was clear he was savoring the power he held over their lives, contemplating how to extend their suffering before the end. The soldier, unwilling to bury his comrades, was forcefully pushed into the pit by the officer. The officer's gaze shifted to the remaining soldier outside the pit, silently conveying his cruel choice: either bury your comrades alive or join them in death. Without hesitation, the soldier made his decision and jumped into the pit, choosing death over betraying his brothers in arms. The captain, who had been observing the entire scene from the side, shook his head and muttered, "This is the worst situation I've ever seen." The officer, growing frustrated, instructed the cameraman to lower the camera, a sign that the gruesome filming session was over. "Looks like you're made of tougher stuff than I expected." The officer sneered, though it was clear his patience had worn thin. The captain, without a word, got into his car and drove off. As the vehicle disappeared into the distance, the sound of gunfire echoed in the air, signaling the soldiers' sacrifice. Despite their deaths, these soldiers had shown the true spirit of warriors: honorable, unyielding, and steadfast even in the face of death. A true soldier excels not only in physical prowess and skill, but also in maintaining his humanity, no matter the circumstances, standing firm in his beliefs. They were prisoners of war, but they held firm to their own moral code, refusing to betray their fellow soldiers or kill their own people. This unwavering commitment to what's right, even in the darkest moments, is something we all can learn from. Let us all hope for a world of peace, where war is nothing more than a distant memory. If you enjoyed this film, don't forget to like and subscribe. Kay looks forward to meeting you again next time. Bye.